All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. This is Web Wednesday, the show where we bring on some really cool people to chat about various web dev topics. And today I'm really pleased to be joined back again by Damola, who joined us a handful of months ago, although really, what is time anyway these days, to talk about the process of managing a startup. Because after all, if you're like building a website and getting things going, there's a very good chance that this might be something that you're looking to get rolling. And so Damola came in and talked a lot about his experience with that and so forth. And then he said, "Hey, I'm also now building out this Angular app. I want to come back and I want to talk about that." And I went, "That sounds fantastic. Let's do it." And so he's coming back. So Damola, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
Glad to have you back. So, how have you been since we last chatted?
Other than this whole pandemic thing, pretty good. Yeah,
This
been
never-ending day rolling into the next, into the next.
yeah. But no, I mean pretty good. As a matter of fact, over the last couple of months, we saw quite a bit of growth, just due to the nature of what Cardcraft is and the fact that the platform is built to connect people and keep them connected. So over COVID, we actually saw quite a bit of growth and really have just been trying to build off of that to constantly improve our user experience.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. So, as a real quick refresher, and I know that you've got a slide on this, but we'll get to Cardcraft in a second. Let's start with who is Damola? Who are you?
That is a great question. So my name is Damola. People call me D for short. I am technically a startup technical architect within the Microsoft for Startups team. I've been at Microsoft a little over 3 years now. But when I'm not Microsofting, I am a serial entrepreneur and a constant hacker. So I'm always working on side projects or just different things that push my skills and allow me to stay fresh. So a little bit about myself, and I'll talk a little bit more about what my experience been a little bit more in the startup and the really entrepreneurship space once we get going.
I love it. Perfect. Sorry, there was like a little chat that had come in, and I wanted to reply to it real quick. And there was something that you had said, and I went, "Oh, I want to ask a question about that." Now I totally forgot, and I'm sure it will come back to me here in a moment. Although I did appreciate you using Microsofting as a verb. I definitely got a kick out of that. Now I know that the project that you're currently working on is Cardcraft, or called Cardcraft. What is Cardcraft?
Cardcraft is a full service greeting card company. We allow you to, from your phone or from a device, select a card, personalize it, and then we take care of full service printing the card, having your personalized message written with our handy robot Robbie, and sticking it in the mail for you. So we've been doing this for a couple years, and most recently started branching into other stationery products such as postcards and prints recently.
I love it, and I appreciate the fact that you named the robot Robbie. That's like a perfect name for a robot. Does it stand for something, or is it just simply like robot for short?
Yeah, Robbie for short. Robbie the robot.
Okay, I dig it. I dig it.
A little alliteration there.
I always appreciate alliteration, even though I can never remember how to spell it. And I know that that you sort of went through a little bit of a process. Do you want to walk us through that process? You talked an awful lot about it on the last show, which people can find over on YouTube/Microsoft Developer, and I'll try and find a direct link here in a minute. But you talked an awful lot about that crawl, walk, run. I knew I was eventually going to get it correct here. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you've got a slide on that where you sort of highlight that process.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's what it sounds like. First, you got to crawl before you can walk, and you got to walk before you can run. And this is a theory that I really kind of developed over the years as a serial entrepreneur after working on tens of apps and realizing that it wasn't really so much about building this huge, gigantic thing that you present at the end, but it was really that process and the learnings that came over a period of time as you build your product and ultimately build the business. So for me, I codified that as crawl, walk, run. Just three simple words that'll allow me to really think about a product from start to finish in terms of what does it look like to crawl here? What does it look like if I'm walking? And then finally, what does it look like when we're running with this product?
Okay. And for Cardcraft specifically, what were those steps? What was that crawl step? What was that walk step? What was that run step?
So for Cardcraft, the basics of the idea was that people want well-designed, high-quality cards. And in order to kind of test that out, you don't necessarily need a web app or a mobile app. You really just need a way to show people what your card designs look like and then get their feedback. So for me, the crawl step with Cardcraft was actually to launch our original version on Etsy. For those who don't know, Etsy is a marketplace that allows you to put products up, and then usually you'll find handcrafted makers on there, and essentially test out your product. And for me, it was great because we put one of our designs up and we got a sale, and I was like, wow, I was not expecting that.
And then from there, you moved on to the walk. And what was that walk step then for you?
Absolutely. So once we had proven that we're doing well on a marketplace, the natural progression for us is we want to be able to drive traffic. We want to be able to control our user experience a little bit better. And once again, without necessarily investing heavily in writing a whole bunch of code. So for us, the natural progression was to actually move on to Shopify as a platform and use a combination of the same kind of technique where we're mostly focused on uploading our products, getting our products into, say, the back end or the admin, and then ultimately selling and promoting the product and the service on Shopify as a platform.
Okay, I dig that. And, I want to call something out here because this is certainly, I think, a trap most of us as web developers wind up falling into is we would look at something like Shopify and we would think, oh, I can build that and maybe you can and maybe you could do a better job of it and especially like maybe a bit more specific to whatever it is that you're doing. But the real question is like, but is that going to be worth the investment? Is that really going to be what where we want to start investing our money, our time, and our effort? And it sounded like for you, at least for that particular stage that you were in, it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to start developing something all on your own.
100%. It was one of those things where I realized that I would probably spend more time writing the admin system that would just allow me to upload and add products than actually delivering value to our end users and our customers, right? Because the end users and the customers, they don't really care about how the products got there. They just care that when they want to send a birthday card to their mom, that they can do that. So for me, realizing that was key early in the life of Cardcraft. And what it allowed us to do, honestly, was just learn and grow. We understood the types of cards that people were looking for, how to kind of like prioritize and put things on our website. And really, it feeds really well into the step that we're currently working on, which is the run step, which is customizing the user experience using a combination of really good UI UX and Angular in order to deliver on a better card sending experience.
Okay, that's like sort of a perfect segue. Thanks for setting me up like that. I appreciate it. Into where you currently are, which is that run step of now like getting in and building the site. So my initial question there is, why did you choose Angular? And maybe as like a sub question as well, like what is Angular for anybody who might not be familiar with it?
That's a good question. So Angular is one of the more modern JavaScript front-end frameworks. And for those who have been keeping up with JavaScript, or maybe not so much keeping up with JavaScript, over the years, there's been quite the change in terms of just how websites, specifically web apps, are built. You've seen that from the likes of React. Some folks may even remember the Knockout JS phase or Backbone. And what we've arrived at, or where we're at today, is there's a couple pretty popular ones that folks maybe on this stream will know of. Those are things like React, Angular, and Vue. And what they are they're a prescribed way of architecting and building front end apps. A lot of time and energy is spent into thinking about how to build back end apps, but just because of the prevalence of the web and what we're seeing with mobile and responsiveness, there's been a shift over the last couple of years on how to build better front ends and how to build better web applications. So Angular, which is a project out of Google, is one such project. And why Angular is my really kind of, I guess, front end architecture of choice has to do with the fact that it's able to work with TypeScript, which is a language that's strongly typed. One of the issues that you'll tend to run into with JavaScript by itself is that there's a lot of different ways to accomplish the same thing, and not a whole lot of rules that keep you from screwing things up to a certain extent. So for me, coming from a primarily .NET C# background, having the really kind of the compilation checks and having the code that tells me when my syntax isn't quite right is really helpful, and it allows me to move a little bit faster of that. And then also just architecting in a way that allows me to use best practices and it's tried and true for websites that scale is one of the benefits of Angular. So Angular is a front-end JavaScript framework, came out of Google. It's been through many iterations. I think we're currently on version 9, if I'm not mistaken, and it works really well with cross-platform development using a combination of Node.js and really just components, which is another big piece of the way that really the web has changed. So I'll go into a little bit about what components are for those who maybe haven't been caught up in a while. So a long time ago, the way you would build your websites is that you would get some HTML, you get some JavaScript, and then maybe you pull in a couple libraries like jQuery, and you throw these all together and just hope that somebody out there did not decide to name their function the same as yours. And if they did, then you got into really just this fun place of figuring out how to override either their code or styles that were found in either their JavaScript or their CSS. So a lot of the folks who are way smarter than me and that had been working on front end for quite a while took a look at it and said, there has to be a better way to do this. And so thus came what we call modularization. So people started looking at ways that you could actually take JavaScript and take really kind of the front end and break it into isolated chunks. So one of the big things we talk about a lot when we're coding is this concept of reuse. And there's no reason that we couldn't necessarily do the same thing on the front end. So when we talk about components, we're talking about if you're familiar with, say, the H1 reference tag or the element tag or the link tag, these are fundamental constructs in the HTML programming language, but we're applying that same concept and we're building perhaps tags such as a login tag or a email tag or a tag that shows your header. The idea being that rather than writing and building with those kind of smaller HTML components, you can define that component and then using a language such as Angular or one of the other modern frameworks, you pull those components in so that you're not having to write all of that JavaScript, all of that CSS from scratch. So it's a really great way if you're building an application that's going to have a lot of reuse, a lot of components in it, to pretty much cut down on the amount of coding and amount of testing you have to do, and really just makes it a little easier to build larger apps.
I dig it. Yeah, I definitely don't miss those days of effectively just include files where, like behind the scenes, it was just simply like copying and pasting all of that into one huge file and then things just going completely sideways. I don't miss that at all. So Tom William over on YouTube asks an interesting question, and I'm going to put it out there, and I don't know if you've actually worked with Flutter or not. I've like seen it like pop up in a couple of places, but I'll openly admit I'm not overly familiar. But the question is will Flutter replace Angular?
It's a great question. And I do have some Flutter experience.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, so what's nice about being a serial entrepreneur, you get to touch a little bit of everything. So one of the apps that I built most recently was built with Flutter. Flutter is nice because it's a cross-platform language as well, and it's built on the Dart programming language. So Flutter is the, how do I explain it? It's the SDK and the mobile specific, and I say mobile with quotation marks just because the idea behind Flutter, very similar to React, you may have heard of React and React Native, is that you can write more or less with the same syntax and the same languages, but then when the code is compiled for the respective platforms, whether it's Android, iOS, or even web, right, the components are rendered to look like the component should on that platform. So a great example of that is with, say, iOS. iOS tends to have more kind of rounded edges. Android tends to have squares. So you will define a component in Flutter that's like, let's say, a button or a box. And when it shows up on your iOS device, it's going to have rounded corners. When it shows up on your Android, it's going to have square corners. And then when it shows up on the web, it's going to look like a web button. So the question of whether Flutter will eventually replace Angular, I don't work at Google. I'm not sure, but I'm going to say no for today, just because they're kind of have two different purposes, right? Flutter is more Google's attempt to really kind of do cross-platform application development, primarily on mobile, although you can build and write Flutter code for web, whereas Angular is web first, web app first. And the idea behind it is that we're optimizing components for the web using a structured programming language and architecture.
Okay, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you. I learned something here. Like I said, I literally had no idea what Flutter is, so I appreciate that you educated me. One other question that just came up. I'm loving all the questions
I
that
love
are
this.
coming
This is
in here.
great. I'm super excited. Like let's
Fantastic.
talk. This is what we want.
Exactly. Stephen Simon over on YouTube asked the question, how do you keep up with the new versions of Angular? It seems like they come like every 6 months, and I'm always like 2 versions or a year behind.
That's a great question. It's a shared problem, and the way I've gotten around it is by really kind of like looking for the LTS or the long-term support releases. There's a numeric numbering system that you'll see when a version of pretty much any software is usually released. It's going to be something. It's usually have three numbers in there, like let's say 9.1.2 or something like that, and those numbers represent what are called major, minor, and incremental changes. So what you'll see is when you go from like a 9 to a 10 or 6 to a 7, that's a huge release, meaning that there may be some API changes, some syntax changes, some things that really are going to be different between that and the former SDK or the former way it worked. And then you'll see sometimes that maybe they'll go from 9.1 to 9.2. And what that really just means is just a couple minor changes and tweaks, maybe nothing major, nothing breaking. And then incremental, you usually don't see those as much just because those usually stay in like the beta or the alpha channels, meaning that those are features that are bleeding edge. So if you really want to be on that next build, you can get on that. But for me, what I've tried to do is really just try to like bucket my development to the major and then occasionally the minor releases as well. So for me right now, that's running on Angular 9, but I kind of like take this same approach to just about anything, because what you'll see, for example, is we even do the same thing here at Microsoft with .NET Core. If you remember, not too long ago, 2.1 was all the rage, and now we're on 3, and I think we're even on 5 now. So I say that to say that
With 6 coming shortly.
and 6 right up the coming around the corner. So yeah, it's a problem that is a good problem, because it means that there's improvements. There's usually going to be security enhancements, speed, all of those things, but it can be problematic as a developer as you're trying to like juggle. Well, especially when the documentation doesn't match just because the version changed. But it's a problem that I have as well.
Okay. That's a great answer. I appreciate that. And right along those lines, and there's like now a queue of questions, and I'm going
I love
slightly out of
this.
order,
Look,
but
we could talk
keeping it
about this
together.
because this
Yeah.
means you're going to have me come back. So
Absolutely. No, I love having you on. You're fantastic. And I love it for exactly this reason that I can just throw out a question and then you just, go on. It's wonderful. But Stephen asked the question, someone willing to learn Angular now, where should they start? Angular JS, Angular 2, or latest 12?
definitely probably the latest.
Okay.
Angular JS was the original version of Angular several years ago, meaning that you'll only really find that on a couple blogs that haven't been updated and or maybe legacy code. So they're actually two different kind of approaches to doing Angular. So Angular JS is old Angular. What I've seen a lot of lately is Angular 9. A lot of the demos, a lot of the samples that I've been working with have been targeted at Angular 9. That being said, the latest and greatest, the documentation that's going to be most up to date, it's going to kind of be probably geared towards Angular 12. So
Okay.
if you were to go to the Angular.io or the Angular website right now, you probably would be started off at Angular 12. That being said, what's really nice is that once you kind of learn things at the high level, they tend to really kind of just improve upon or build upon what you know previously. So don't be surprised, for example, if Angular 9 and Angular 12 are just slightly different, or maybe there's a couple different syntax changes, but it's something that happens. And pick one that you can find the most documentation on or the most support with, and try to stick with it for as long as possible.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Let me actually follow up then with like my own personal question, which is for Angular, because I know that Angular is built on TypeScript and the two are very closely tied together. Do you need to know TypeScript in order to do Angular?
Technically, no, because Angular will actually also work with JavaScript. And the thing about TypeScript, for those who aren't aware, is that TypeScript is just a superset of JavaScript, meaning that TypeScript is a meta language. It compiles into JavaScript. So the way you can kind of think about it is that I consider it kind of like a compound word, right? So you pretty much take two English words or two JavaScript like functions or something, and you put them in a manner that follow certain rules and grammars. The only difference being that we have a type and a compilation system. So if you put a JavaScript, if you can actually like run a JavaScript function, and you won't know it's broken until you're actually running that function. Whereas with TypeScript, that same function won't even let you push it or get it onto the web, because it's going to say, hey, this doesn't follow those syntax and those rules. So you can actually use Angular with JavaScript, but the best practice or the recommendation is to definitely leverage it with TypeScript. And the thing with TypeScript is that it's a subset or superset of JavaScript.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of TypeScript. I think everybody should definitely start to make that move. And the part that you called out, I think is probably the biggest for me, is being able to catch those errors right there at design time and not at runtime. And especially like if you've got a typo, or you misused a method, like maybe you just inverted the parameters or something like that, you'll just start getting these really weird unknown or null reference exceptions, or otherwise, and it's not always clear as to where that bug is. TypeScript will sniff all of those out. It just completely eliminates huge classes of bugs because it's going to give you those errors at design time. It's so fantastic and definitely worth that little bit of investment to get in and start digging into it.
Absolutely.
Casimir asked the question, how is it compared to Blazor with regards to like type safety, components, and developer productivity, and the learning curve?
Love that question, because I'm also a huge proponent of Blazor. As a matter of fact, this was almost became Blazor and web app. So I've used both. I got applications deployed on both, and there's a lot of similarities, and there's also some differences. So let's start with the similarities. So once again, if we think about where the web is going and where we're going with front end web applications in general, we're moving more into this componentized world, meaning that we write once, we can reuse, we can compile and potentially share those components. So let's imagine that, Kashmir, you create a really good menu widget, something that allows you to just kind of like add any menu item that you need. It doesn't make sense for me to necessarily rewrite that, right? If I could just download your component and I can pull it into my web app, why not do that? So Angular and Blazor both encourage that. And Blazor also operates on the concepts of components. Now, where it gets interesting is that JavaScript is, and no offense to my JavaScript folks, is a notoriously hard language to work with. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was built to be general purpose and work across the web. JavaScript has grown and turned into, honestly, I think the most used language when you consider Node as a backend and as a tool. And what that means is that there's some things that the language does that were not necessarily well thought out. Whereas languages such as C Sharp, which Blazor is built primarily on, are built to be, once again, type safe, have a lot of the same capabilities that we talked about with TypeScript. But the difference is that they allow you as a potential, say, .NET or C Sharp developer to leverage those same skills that you have maybe built building the back end, but apply them to the front end. And the way you should think about it is that, when you're building a web application, right, there's some things that are just constants, meaning that you're always going to have some kind of HTML. There's usually going to be some kind of styling. And then where we get into this really interesting space when it comes to programmability, meaning like actually getting the website to do cool things. So when you click on the button, it's scrolling up and down, is that language, the way that the web is going with WebAssembly and stuff, that is up to the user, meaning that, right now we're talking about Blazor. Blazor's programming language is primarily C Sharp, but with WebAssembly and the way that the web is developing, that same code could be written in Dart, that same code could be written in JavaScript, that same code could be written in Python that will do the manipulations and will actually add the interactivity to your web application. So it really becomes a matter of preference, right? Where Angular is more pure web, meaning that there's no compilation that happens. When you're talking about Blazor, what you're going to actually end up having is a little bit of code that's downloaded, because you're going to actually have a compiler in the browser that's going to compile your code and it's going to run your code. So what does that mean is you may have a hit up front in terms of how fast your website loads, but then your website runs at the speed of C Sharp, which is really, really fast. It's just a difference between the way an interpreted language like, say, JavaScript is occupied versus a binary or compiled language like C Sharp. Essentially, it runs at machine speed. So it becomes a preference of what are you most comfortable with. You can do a lot of the same things with both languages and both platforms. I like working with both. I context switch between both, and I'm gonna have to come back and now do a Blazor on Azure tutorial in the near future.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm like I said, I really always happy to have you back. There's a couple of like little back and forth in the chat, and there was a call out about like server side rendering for Angular and Blazor on the server and so forth. So there, boy, there's like three questions in there that I want to be able to bubble up. Let's start here. So the first question is about like server-side compilation for, let's say, Angular, Blazor, and I want to say like React and Svelte will do that, and I'm pretty sure that there's something that will do Vue with that as well. What is server-side compilation when it comes to those front-end frameworks that we're talking about?
It's a great question. So if you think about the web and you really think about the way it works, it's really built on this concept of server and client architecture, meaning that you're on your computer, let's call that the client, and somewhere in the internet, let's say Azure or in the cloud, somewhere up in Redmond, there's another computer, and that computer has on it the files that make up a website. Now, when we're talking about web apps specifically, not a website, but a web app is going to tend to be dynamic, meaning that if you think about the white sites that you tend to visit, they're very live. They're constantly being updated. So the old server client architecture that used to apply, meaning that as a client, I would type in www.microsoft.com. It would call the web server. That web server would locate those files up in Redmond, and then it would send those files back to me, right? That model has changed a bit because so much happens between the time that that file is being sent back from the server and it's being rendered in your browser. And then not only that, there's a lot more that can actually happen on the client side. So this is where server-side rendering and client-side rendering kind of differ. Essentially, what we're saying when we're talking about server-side rendering is that when you have a dynamic website and you were to maybe like access it, right? What's actually going to happen is rather than to send you back the HTML, the CSS, and all the stuff, so that your your browser renders it or shows it or pulls it up. It's compiled and rendered on the server, and then the server is essentially presenting you a view. The way that that works with Blazor, because I think somebody mentioned it in the context of Blazor, is Blazor actually operates in two modes. One is as a server-side connection, in which there's a front end and it actually maintains a connection to the server and will call back to that server and update your view every now and then. And then it can also act as a standalone, and that's when all the code in the front end is kind of packaged into that application, and you don't actually have to call back to the server. So that's great for a scenario where you've built an app that doesn't necessarily need to be on the internet all the time, right? And essentially you just need it to work really well when it's on your computer, and then hopefully when you do get internet later, it'll talk back to the server. Whereas when you're talking about server-side rendering, your website's going to depend on that server in order to actually fully realize the website.
Okay. Then let me follow up with this. Is so we've got like Angular and Blazor and all of that. Very very popular for developing front end apps, and that definitely seems to be sort of like where we're going as far as web dev goes. But we also still have frameworks like MVC or Django, which are all server side run, that are extremely popular. Like I'm a huge fan of Django because you can do things with it so much faster than you can, I think, with any other framework. When you're trying to create that front end for a database. Why might one choose, do you think, to use a server side MVC Django versus using Angular or vice versa?
Great question. And I'm actually a huge fan of both. So for me, it tends to be .NET Core MVC, where depending on the project and speed, and really maybe even just how I'm feeling that day, I'll go one way or the other. So the way you should think about this is really what's your end goal. If you really think about where we're at in terms of the web and really modern software development architecture, there's been a huge shift towards what are called microservices. And when you think about a microservice, it's kind of like what it sounds like. It's a micro version of a service or a function. So the way you should kind of think about this is your website, the client, the actual UI, that's one service. In the case of Cardcraft, we have 3 other services that support that front end. So if I navigate to cardcraft.io or I go to the website, what's going to end up happening is like my UI is going to show up and it's going to show you the picture, it's going to show you all those things, but it's going to then make a call to an API or one of my services. And one of those services is going to be the product service. And what that's actually going to do is it's going to query my database. It's going to say, hey, where are all the products in here? And then that service is going to return back to the UI the list of products that are available for purchase. That's when we're looking at, say, an Angular or a standalone client versus like an MVC client. Now, why would we do that? Well, the reason we'll do that is because if you think about the goal of Cardcraft in particular, our goal is to make sending physical greeting cards as easy as sending text messages. And while you could technically send a card from your computer, and that's great, where I really want to get to at Cardcraft is the point where you pull out your phone and then you type your message, you hit send, and there's a card in the mail. Because of that, we usually want to decouple the web application, the actual functionality, the button that will allow me to actually put in an order to Robbie from the client. And because of that, I know that there's some folks who maybe aren't huge fans of mobile devices with screens, maybe say an elderly parent or grandparent, they would prefer to use the web. So because of that, you optimize for each platform based on your users and your end goal. And that's the advantage of using an Angular or doing a standalone client and separating that from your web application or your API. Now, when we talk about MVC, what's really nice about that is that it makes it a little easier because technically they kind of do the same thing. The only difference is that you're putting those projects typically in the same web host and the same API. So one of the things that's important to think about is there's this nice little thing on the internet called CORS, and it keeps the internet safe. And it means that you can't make a website call or a call to an API without it approving your ability to show that information on your website. Now, when you're working with an MVC framework like the Django or one of the other frameworks, you're still able to build your front end using HTML, using CSS, and using all those things. But now when you're making your calls against that API, you're not having to necessarily go to another server. You can still make calls to other servers, but you're making a call onto that same server that has the code that will also load your web page. So it allows you to potentially save, and have one kind of like URL that everything lives on, your API, your web application, all of that. But that also makes it a little bit harder because, once again, we also want to support that mobile app. And if our code and our website and our MVC framework is built primarily to serve our front end, we might not have taken into account that, hey, the UI might look a little different. So it's really just a matter of preference. There's not a good answer of which one is better, which one is worse. I use both just depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. But then I tend to skew towards decoupling the client from the server just because I know that 9 times out of 10, I'm going to end up building a mobile app.
Right. Okay. That actually that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely appreciate the clarity there, because I know that for a lot of new developers in this space, trying to figure it all of it out, that's frequently one of the biggest questions for them. Bringing this back a little bit to Angular, I'm probably going to mispronounce the first name here, but I heard asked the question. Going back to Angular, if you can write that without TypeScript, how do you then replace the @component decorators?
So the decorators, that's a great question. So decorators are specific to TypeScript, in my understanding. And for those who aren't aware or know what decorators are, essentially they're a way to decorate the code. So, and actually, I think this might be a great time to actually show some Angular code.
Yeah,
If you
let's
don't
do it.
mind. Let me do a little screen sharing, and I'll pull up some Angular code, and we'll take a look. So, a decorator, which you'll tend to find in a Angular application, is going to actually allow you to do functions or things on that code that you normally wouldn't be able to do without defining a reference to something. So great example here. We have our app module, which is our kind of main module for Angular. And actually, let me do this. Let me expand this and go into the app component, because the app component here has a decorator. So looking at this, at line 11, we have this export function and we have a class. And on top of that, we have this component decorator that's saying that, hey, whenever this class app component is built or rendered, we want to make sure it's tied to app root, which is one of our other classes, and that we use the app component template and that we use the style URL. And you normally would not be able to do this in JavaScript, is my understanding. And actually, I'm not an expert here because I don't use as much JavaScript.
I'm pretty sure what you're saying is valid there. I'm pretty sure that decorator is specific to TypeScript.
Yep. And what's interesting about this is that you see this also in C#. So once again, there's certain languages, just because of the way that they're written or they're built, that support this concept of a decorator in them. So in this example for C#, which, like I said, is kind of like um, the reason that Angular and also C# are both preferred languages. I grew up and I came up as a developer working in this kind of object-oriented programming manner. So what that really just means is that you have a class. In this case, this is going to be my account controller, and this is my app component, right? But what you'll notice is that the syntax is just a little different, but the same thing applies. So if we look at it in the C#, what we're saying as a decorator is that, hey, whenever somebody navigates to our URL, maybe api.cardcraft.io/API, and then / the name of this controller, we want that code to come into this class, right? And in this case, we see a couple of other decorators, meaning that not only do we want it to go in the API / controller, but then we also want the logout user code to call this code, meaning that if you were to hit my endpoint right now with logout user, it's going to come in here. So this is something that's inherent just because of the way that the language is designed. Whereas with JavaScript, I'm not so sure you actually have decorators in the sense that I've been used to with C# and also with TypeScript. So there may be a JavaScript expert or someone else on the chat who may be able to kind of correct me there, but that's kind of what a decorator is for those who don't know what a decorator is. And what's nice about it is that it's a really easy way to add code or tell the code how it should kind of be function without necessarily having to write a lot of extra code. And in this case, for example, we also have this with a HTTP post decorator, which just means that, look, the only time we should respond when this endpoint is called is if it's an HTTP post. So no gets, no deletes, only HTTP posts, and only when somebody calls this logout user route.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. So I guess, use TypeScript. Everybody should be using TypeScript. That's the takeaway from all of this.
Ideally.
Yes. Shane Becker over on YouTube asks a question, and he does it kind of cheeky, and I'm going to ask it in a more plain spoken manner, which is, why would somebody choose Angular over fill in other framework here? So, like, personally, these days I'm a huge Svelte fan,
Okay.
but why would somebody choose Angular over another?
That's a great question, and to be honest, it's truly a matter of preference. For me, it was the similarity to C#. So once again, coming from a C# background, I feel really comfortable in the really kind of the compiled and the strictly typed manner. That being said, I also use React on occasion. I have applications I've developed in React Native. I have applications I've done in Vue. And, I think for me, I come back to Angular mainly because when it gets to a certain level of complexity, more so than the other languages, I would say Angular is opinionated in how you should structure your project. And then also it allows me to actually offload some of my development work and effort to other Angular developers. I think in terms of popularity, I may be mistaken on this. I think React is #1. Angular is either #2 or 3. So because there's a shared kind of architecture and there's a shared understanding of how components are created and where those components should go, it's easier for me as a serial entrepreneur to actually find other people that will actually help me build upon my Angular project. So it's this is constantly changing. Folks who have been in the front end web development space for any period of time know that maybe 5 years from now we'll be saying this about a different language, but it's really a matter of preference. And then for me also popularity and support at this point.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. 10 years from now, just like we were saying, hey, remember using Knockout? We'll be saying, hey, remember using Angular? And now we're using, who knows what.
Hopefully Blazor or WebAssembly.
Yeah. I really wish I could remember who the name what the name of this developer was. This is a book I read many years ago, and one of the things that he calls out, which you did there as well, is if we go into something assuming that we don't always have the right answer, that if we go into something assuming that, hey, I don't necessarily have the right way to write some code, we're going to inherently just be better developers, because then we start to rely on the work of others and the path that they've blazed in front of us. So that way we can go, oh, okay, then this is the best practice, and I'm going to follow along with that, rather than trying to figure out how to, to use the old proverbial example there, reinvent the wheel. That let me take advantage of what's already out there, because I know that they've already gone through all the struggles, and I can then just benefit from their efforts.
100%, 100%. And I mean, I'm definitely a poster child for not prescribing to the hammer mentality, meaning that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I like to look at each project for what the end result should be, how quickly I want to achieve that, and then what's the best set of technologies or technologies to help us achieve that goal. So that's where the exposure to Flutter, Django, Ruby, you name it, all comes from.
I appreciate that, and I make this analogy from time to time. It's like, the reason that you took or hopefully you took another language in school isn't necessarily just to learn that language, but rather that in learning that other language you learn more about your own. And so, because of the fact, like you mentioned, that you've done a lot of different things, I've played around in React, I've played around in Vue, I've played around in Svelte. Admittedly, I haven't done Angular yet, but because of the fact that I've done all of those, I've now learned more about web development, and I've picked up different things from those different frameworks where I can go, hey, you know what, that actually could work here, or maybe that doesn't work here, or I get a better understanding about why it is that Vue is built the way that it's built and Svelte is built the way that it's built. And you really only get that if you're getting out there and trying different frameworks.
100%.
Cool. So we've got roughly about like 10, 12 minutes
Okay.
left here. At the moment, there aren't any more questions, but that could certainly change. I think, gosh, we could do one
Let's,
of two things. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was going to suggest, because one of the things we kind of talked a little bit about was the different frameworks. Maybe we could do an introduction to our Learn module and how to actually build on any of those frameworks. I think Svelte is on there, React. How about we just
Yeah,
start there?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So for folks who are watching this later, you'll see this link in our chat. But the example I wanted to run through today was actually going to be based on our Learn module. And for those who don't know, we have on docs.microsoft.com a huge set of really just kind of pre-made modules that allow you to actually walk through building a web application. So this module is called Publish an API to Azure Static Web Apps, which is what we wanted to cover. And what's really nice about it is that for those who were inquiring about other programming languages or JavaScript frameworks, we got them for you right here. So it's really nice because once again, it's more understanding the high level concepts, right? Understanding the difference between your client and your back end that matters. And then choosing how you want to realize that is really just a matter of preference. So want to double check you guys can actually see my screen, and let me zoom in a
Yep.
little bit more for you. Yeah, check this out, and this link will be in the YouTube comments when you get a chance. But this really just kind of walks through a hello world example in which your company is launching a shopping list web app. And in this case, I'll go with the Angular example. And then not only that, what's really nice about this is Microsoft has done a really good job of making it so that you can actually just base this off of one of our existing really kind of JavaScript or GitHub templates. So what's really nice is when you actually want to get started with this project, all you'd have to really do is pick your preferred client, front end client, whether it's Angular or React. How do you pronounce this one? Is Svelte?
Svelte.
Svelte, or Vue. And then it's really nice because you're able to now kind of get this off of GitHub. And we'll go to the next section, and we will go ahead and create our repository. So from here, you create from the template page. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and name this what they prescribe, which is My Static Web App and API. And then what's really nice about this is that this will actually allow you to make more or less a clone, kind of like a fork of the official docs. And with that being said, creating that repository will generate it for us. And then just like using really just any get client, right, we're able to now pull that code in. So for me, I have a nice little location on my computer that I like to put things in called code. So we will
Very
go
creative.
ahead. Yeah, I know, right? We'll go ahead and get a bash shell here, and we'll clone it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it with Ubuntu just because it'll allow me to have a little bit more freedom. So get clone. And then what's really nice about this is because, once again, our awesome folks in Microsoft know that it's up to you which kind of framework you want to use. If we were actually to cd into My Static Web App and then open it up in code, what you'll actually be able to see here is really kind of starter code for the 4 or so front-end frameworks that we are currently allowing you to build on our static web apps. So in this case, got Angular, got React for the React folks, and Svelte and Vue. So let me pause for a second, see if there's any questions or any thoughts. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, Chris, or we can see how much more I can get through. But
no questions at the moment. I'm a Christopher, and no, and I do want to highlight though that for anybody, and I think you mentioned this already, but it's certainly worth repeating, that for anybody who's just like looking for a comparison, that here's a perfect place to do this. And this was actually put together by John Papa, who certainly knows his stuff. So definitely.
You know a thing or two, I heard.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember looking a lot of John Papa's Pluralsight videos, and that's where I learned a lot of my my .NET, a lot of my front end web app development stuff. So it's very, very cool.
Yeah, he's actually now my in Microsoft parlance we would say skip level, but
Okay.
for anybody who's not from Microsoft, he's my manager's manager, and yeah, he just came over, and I'm super thrilled to be under his structure. So yeah,
That's awesome. So what's really nice about this is we have our Angular code, or we have the code for the different front ends. What's really nice is that this code's been optimized so that you can actually run it almost out the gate. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and cd into this folder once again. So cd .. We're in the code, so cd my static web app, and then ls cd. All right, and then in this case, I'm gonna go personally into the Angular application just because like I know how to build this. So in this case, we do a quick ls, you'll notice that we have a package .json file. And for those who are familiar with or comfortable with npm, all we have to do is now run an npm install, which shouldn't take too long, but once it's done building, this will actually now get our code in a state of where it can actually compile and run. And then if you can imagine, you do more or less the same thing for these other ones. What's really nice, once again, is that on our site for the what do you call it, for the exercises, you really just got to jump between the different languages to see the different compilation steps. So in this case for React, it looks like it's going to be the same npm install, which is funny, right? Because once again, similar, pretty much using, once again, JavaScript as the underlying framework, just couple differences in the code or the call to actually get them to compile.
Yep.
So in this case, with our Angular now almost done compiling, it's funny, this is supposed to be my fast machine with the Xeon processor. It's trying to make this go a little faster. But once this is done, in this case, according to the documentation, it's really just a matter of running npm start in order to kind of get this up and running. So for me, I'll go ahead and hit that npm start. And then if all goes as planned, which hopefully it should, our application runs after a couple prompts, and our application will pop up at localhost 4200. So let me go ahead and grab that. And then once our compilation is done,
chugga.
And notice that we're actually compiling. So remember what we talked a little bit about in terms of like why we would leverage something like this versus pure JavaScript. And really with all the frameworks such as Svelte, React, etc., you're gonna more or less do the same thing. They pre-compile and then they produce an output file. So, oh, look at that. It even opens it up for it. So in this example, we're now running an Angular application, and then what's really nice is because we're doing this with the with the task runner, we're actually able to real time make modifications to our app and actually see those show up. So I'm not going to do anything really fancy here. Pretty much just going to change this so that it says something a little different. So in this case, we're at the products folder. We'll go here and we'll just make a small change in terms of, actually, is it going to be here? Detail, product details. Actually, let me do this. Looking for the HTML here. Or actually, better yet, let's just make one small change so that it doesn't compile. Because I think that would actually be interesting to see. Right, let's break something.
When in doubt, break something.
Let's break something. So once again, what's the beauty in Angular? We're going to go ahead and hit the save button. It should do its thing, and it doesn't like that, right?
Yep.
Because we forgot our T, where you wouldn't necessarily get that in JavaScript. And look at that, we fixed it. So, you know, one of the things I like about Angular, we didn't get to do this at the scale that I wanted to, but
that's okay. We're gonna have you back. We're gonna have you back. We're gonna do a show where we actually do talk about Angular. But like this Q&A was fantastic. It was brilliant.
Really great questions. Great audience interaction. I had a lot of fun.
So, but yeah, cool. So where can people find you?
Oh, yep. Find me on Twitter, best ways, Damola Omotosho, and then you can also find me at Cardcraft Us or cardcraft.io. So check us out, order a card, say happy birthday to mom. You know where to find us.
Beautiful. I love it. Damola, thank you so much for coming on. Like as soon as we're done with this, we're gonna take a look at the calendar and try to get you back on either in like November. Might have to be January, but we'll have to see. But in any event, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. This is Web Wednesday. We're here every week, 3 p.m. Pacific, talking about something that is web dev related. So yeah, thanks for tuning in and bye.
See ya.